been Stephen Elswick's bailiwick for many moons now, and we're trying to continue that tradition of bringing enlightenment to people that otherwise probably wouldn't be exposed to it. Ladies, gentlemen, inventors aside. Our first speaker this morning is Susan Gordon, and this is going to be kind of a fascinating presentation on cutting-edge technologies in the medical application fields. In this case, initially veterinary in its application, but as I'm sure a lot of us in these fields that we all congregate and realize that that's mostly because of an agency called the FDA in this country, which regulates or mangles, as the case may be, a lot of potential medical applications and technologies that are in common use elsewhere in the world, but we have certain reservations. So, without any further ado, I'd like to present Susan Gordon, who's going to discuss, this is a mouthful, I'll speak slowly if you're taking notes, high-density magnetic monochromatic biofield stimulator, which has had a lot of success in the veterinary field applications and is just now beginning to be turned to human applications. And with that, I'll turn it over to Susan.
Tyler, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for your patience. We're a little late, but not too bad. To start this morning, first thing I have is a message from the fellow who actually built this device for me. I designed it, and he and his wife built several prototypes, and they are actually available through him. And many of you know him very well. That is our good friend Jerry Wills and his wife Kathy. Jerry is deep in the jungle as we speak down in Peru, and I'm hoping he's okay. The last really doesn't have any access and doesn't have modern technology. So he has asked me to challenge anyone here, if you think you may want to work and have the freedom to work and improve on your inventions and be free of the constraints of the US government regulations, he would like to hear from you. You may contact him through his website at Hypertext Studios, all one word, HYPERTEXT studios.com. And they will be back from Peru September 1st. They'll be back in Phoenix and then moving down there probably later that month. So anyone who wants to contact Jerry, if you may be interested in furthering your work in a new and exciting and very challenging environment, please get a hold of Jerry. All right, a little bit of a history of light as a therapy. I know many of you are familiar with the use of light, but there is some very good news. That is, the FDA has actually approved some devices, and there has been some really interesting developments on the discoveries of light. A researcher, Dr. Robert Blanks, at the University of California at Irvine, is beginning a 5-year-long study, along with the College of Syntonic Optometry, to take light more into mainstream medicine. So it's getting there, it really is. It's not going to be much of a suppressed therapy any longer. And working through the veterinary field, a lot of you may know, magnetics and electromagnetic stimulation have been used in the veterinary profession with great success for a long time. A lot of great inventions and therapies have come through the veterinary medicine and eventually get used on people. So I'd just like to read a little bit of a background on light. This is by Edwin D. Babbitt. Light reveals the glories of the external world and yet is the most glorious of them all. It gives beauty, reveals beauty, and is itself most beautiful. It is the analyzer, the truth teller, and the exposer of shams, for it shows things as they are. Its infinite streams measure off the universe and flow into our telescopes from stars which are quintillions of miles distant. On the other hand, it descends to objects which are inconceivably small and reveals through the microscope objects 50 millions of times less than can be seen by the naked eye. Like all other fine forces, its movement is wonderfully soft, yet penetrating and powerful. Without its vivifying influence, vegetable, animal, and human life must immediately perish from the earth and general ruin take place. We shall do well, then, to consider this potential and beautiful principle of light and its component colors, for the more deeply we penetrate into its inner laws, the more it will present itself as the marvelous storehouse of power to vitalize, heal, refine, and delight mankind. Light has been around for a long time, and the research is not new. A lot of people think it's a New Age concept, and yet it isn't. There's evidence that the Egyptians and the Greeks all used light and used crystals for specific frequencies. They would hold the crystals up to the sun. My involvement has been with the College of Syntonic Optometry. I've been an affiliate member since 1992. It was founded by Dr. Harry Riley Spittler, whose slide is up there now. That is the main manual of the Syntonic Therapeutic College. Syntony comes from a Greek word which means to balance. And the syntonic optometry uses colored light applied through the eyes, which balances the autonomic nervous system, which is comprised of two divisions, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. The warmer colors, the red, orange, yellow, stimulate the sympathetic nervous system, and the cooler colors stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system. The college was founded in 1933. And the original device is just a long iron tube with a light source, full spectrum light source at the end, and slots for the colored glass filters, which are specifically made by a company in Philadelphia. There's 12 filters run through the spectrum, and then there's combinations of filters that are used, some of which are like, for example, a magenta, which we call the alpha omega, is the dark red with a dark blue. And that will stimulate you right out into the psychic realms. It's a very, very powerful color. And then we have other miracle workers like a blue-green, which is an antitoxic color. And every color stimulates various processes through the body system. So that device, the long iron tube, was around since 1933. Several years ago, the FDA theoretically opened up a window for approval of all devices that had been in use for a certain number of years, which included that particular device, which is called the Syntonizer. And when the College of Syntonic Optometry, which is based in Boston, went to achieve that approval on this device, not only did the FDA refuse to recognize it, but the DEA got involved with the attorney for the College of Syntonic Optometry. And where that stands today, I'm not sure, but I know it is still very difficult to get any light devices approved. The ones that are approved, the one that I will get to, is the monochromatic red, or low-level laser therapy, which is what I've been using most recently and what I'll get to. Larry, you can go to the next slide, please. And one of our great contemporary proponents of light is Dr. Jacob Lieberman. And if you really want to learn something about the details of the use of the full spectrum and using colored light, this book is absolutely excellent. Dr. Lieberman was the one who encouraged me to join the College of Syntonic Optometry. And I went to two of their training sessions, 1992 and 1993. And after the first one, I came home and built my own set of slides. You can go to a specialty light store and buy a full spectrum light bulb, which was all I used. I took the little slides. Larry, you can go ahead. One more, please. Oh, I just wanted to throw that in as well. The 1990s was declared the decade of the brain by former President George Bush, and tremendous leaps and bounds have been made in neurological medicine. The reason I put that up there is because syntonic therapy, the reason we put the light through the eyes is because it immediately registers in the light-sensitive structures of the brain. And the blood is also treated as it circulates through the back of the retina, so the light information is very quickly carried through the whole body. The windows are said to be the light, the eyes are said to be the windows to the soul. And the soul, the seat of the soul, of course, is said to be the pineal gland. And we also have the hypothalamus, which is what regulates your endocrine system. So you can very quickly and effectively treat the whole body by applying light through the eyes. So the new information that we have on neuroscience in the brain is very, very important, because as we learn more about the brain, then we learn more about the processes, the electrical and chemical processes that take place in the brain. And in fact, all of our thoughts and emotions are quantifiable in chemical and electric terms. So it's very important to the advent of light science that we understand more about the brain as well. There's a lot of things that we now medicate people for with, very harsh, synthesized neuroleptic medicines that can actually be treated with light. Things like depression and all related illnesses, which mostly work on the chemical system that we know as the serotonergic system. You've heard of melatonin, of course, and serotonin, which is made from melatonin. So light itself will balance that hormonal system, and in fact rebalance, again the word syntony, to balance, will balance that system. Okay, next slide, Larry. Back to, I can't see that from here. Oh, the sunbox. That is another device, the full spectrum white light that is used. That is a National Institute of Health and FDA approved device. You can actually get something like that on your insurance, or you can just go buy a full spectrum white light bulb and put it on your desk. If you work under the blue-white fluorescence, I highly recommend full spectrum light bulb, because if you're under fluorescent lights all day, you're going to be getting too much blue. You can get special covers for those tubes that will add the warm tones, but if you're under the blue-white fluorescence, they can cause a lot of health problems. So the sunbox is used to treat, again, depression, jet lag, PMS, seasonal affective disorder, anything that's related to problems with the circadian rhythm, such as sleep disorders. So we don't really need to take melatonin, and the college optometrists have treated a number, we classify it as optometry, but they have found a number of emotional problems that are corrected once the autonomic nervous system is rebalanced. And so the full spectrum white light is going to balance that. Now that is approved. The specific color frequencies are considered to be a heavy drug by the FDA. It's a class 3 drug. And that is why it's been very, very difficult to get approval for full spec for the specific frequencies. Like I say, the one that we're closest to, the one that has been approved, is the monochromatic red, near infrared. Okay, next slide, which I believe is what I was getting to, is is that the Lee filters?
College of Syntonic Optometry.
Oh, that's the certificate. That's my diploma, yes. Yes, I really am a member. Okay, next slide. That's the Lee filters.
That looks like an acid trip.
Hello, excuse me. What? It's a what? Oh, okay. The colored light applied through the eyes. I got ahead of myself. Next slide, then. It's that.
Visual performance field.
The colored light applied through the eyes, a lot of emotional problems are because of constricted peripheral visual fields. And this is where the optometry comes in, is we found that when we open up the peripheral fields, and any optometrist can test for this, they test for the specific color fields, the blue field, the red, and the green, and then they test for the full field. When there's enlarged blind spots or constricted peripheral fields, you will have all kinds of problems. And it will translate in the body, again, depression. You will find constricted fields in children with learning disabilities, attention deficit disorder, all of those things that, again, the very harsh medications are used for. And I was a member of the Scottsdale Alliance Against Drugs for 4 years, and worked with the governor's office on drug policy, which I found out, I got a little bit disillusioned with them after I found out that we were, trying to educate children about drugs, but yet there were 72 different prescription drugs supplied through the Scottsdale school system. Essentially chemical versions of course, the street drugs, which all work on the serotonergic system. And essentially, the light, again, will rebalance for those problems. Many of the optometrists treating children, again, they can tell by the constricted fields that there are definitely emotional problems. It's like a tree without its roots. You're going to find yourself quite off balance. And then the body's glandular system will begin to shut down or alter itself. One system will take over. It's an antagonistic system, the sympathetic and parasympathetic. So you want to keep those in balance. When one side of that starts to dominate, that's when you're going to have various health problems. So we want to open up those constricted visual fields. Most people that these optometrists have treated with the light have been able to go off, and in fact they will usually recommend that they go off the medication before they start treatment. And within usually less than the prescribed 12 treatments of 20 minutes apiece, most people have returned to normal and do not need to go back on medication. Of course, that's it's an area of high responsibility and it's a high risk because, you're talking about people's mental stability and hormonal regulations, but that is where there's been a great deal of success, and of course that's where the FDA is still very difficult to deal with because those drug companies not only pay kickbacks to the school, but they are what pays the FDA. So a company like Eli Lilly that was manufacturing Prozac and of course the very deadly toxin that was under the brand name of NutraSweet, which causes all kinds of visual problems, by the way. I highly recommend, just as an aside here, if anyone is using those artificial sweeteners, aspartame or NutraSweet, that you get off of them immediately. They're not only addictive, but they're highly toxic. And in a report I got from the American Optometric Association, they're causing severe visual problems. And I've had people go off of them. If someone tells me they have continual headaches and can't focus properly, the first thing I ask them is if they're drinking diet sodas. And I usually find that they are, and once they get off of them, the problems disappear immediately. It's really surprising. That is very dangerous stuff. All right, next slide. I still can't see, Larry. Oh, there we go. All right, that's what I was getting to. That's what I built my slides with, was just the little theatrical gels. You can go to some place that supplies equipment to film companies, theater companies. Those are the color gels that go over the theater lights so that you can project the color blue on somebody or whatever. I put those, I did have a modified slide projector that I was using that I could vary the intensity of the bulb. I believe those are 300 watt bulbs, Larry, in the slide projectors. They're very intense. Now when you've worked your way up and your body will absorb all of the different wavelengths, then you can use the full intensity. Otherwise you'd want to use a filter that cuts it a little bit if you're using a slide projector and you want the big color field, which is very powerful. You will actually feel when you project color right onto your body and you look directly into the light source, you will feel things happening inside your body that are very unusual, and you will feel the different colors affecting them. It'll usually go in order. I found that when I projected one color after the other, starting with the red, orange, yellow, green, blue, violet, etc., and went in that order, I actually felt it in each, we'll be metaphysical for a moment and say each chakra, but the chakras of course relate to the glands. So you can overlay a chart of the chakras over the endocrine system and you'll find that the glands correspond. But it was really interesting because I would have thought that I would have felt the red in the base chakra and then moved up. Well, it was actually in reverse. And I could feel the red, it's almost like it's like a pulsating or like almost like a crawling feeling or something inside your body. And if you're not absorbing a particular wavelength, then it may even register as pain. And then you do those sessions a few times over and eventually your body comfortably absorbs all of the colors and you will find that a lot of symptoms will disappear, and depending on what your health problems are. So it's a very interesting process using the full color. Now, that is essentially my training. I learned some slightly different techniques. There's several schools of thought in applying color. And as far as I can tell, they're all effective. Collegiate syntonic optometry, because it was founded by optometrists and is primarily used in practice by professional optometrists, that is why we have that school over there. Darius Dinshaw, a doctor from India who practiced in the United States in the late 1800s, developed a method that he called chromotherapy. And his book is still available today. It's called Let There Be Light by Darius Dinshaw. And he uses what he calls tonation. He tonates the color in various parts of the body. And if you get the book called Let There Be Light, he will list a number of diseases. Let's say you have a heart condition. And you can specifically look up that condition, and he will tell you what color to use and where to project it on your body. If you have the flu, if you're addicted to nicotine, he will tell you where to put the color on your body. I've also used that technique just to try it out. Also very effective because the skin will absorb, like the chlorophyll in the plants, like photosynthesis, it will absorb the light. So it also transfers through the skin. But you can do the same thing through the eyes. And as long as the optic nerve is intact, if you're treating someone who can't see, someone who's blind, as long as the optic nerve is intact, even if someone cannot physically see, the light will still be effective because the structures themselves still absorb the light. There's also another interesting school called the Samasati School of Holographic Color Therapy. And has anyone ever heard of that? There's a fellow here in Arizona that practices, Nishant Matthews. He's up in Sedona. And he does do treatments in Phoenix once a week. So if anyone wants to get a hold of Nishant, I do have his flyers and information with me. And he has a very advanced device called the Moray machine. But he was trained in India and also in the United States. I believe this school has a base in North Carolina. And the Samasati technique uses little color pens, and he treats through the auric layers. He will start at the skin level and then treat back through the auric layers of the body. And they use the color in a slightly different technique for emotional rebalance. He will use a center median and use one color up the center median through the auric layers, through the energy field, and a different color down the back, and then he may use other colors right on the third eye. It's a very interesting system, and I actually tried that on one of my horses, and he seemed to like it. But that's the Samasati school, and they use the full spectrum for treatment as well. The other one is, there's a company in New Mexico that makes a device called BioScan, and there's a company in Colorado that has two divisions, one that has developed a device for human use, the other for animal. And this is where we get into the device that I had built. The company in New Mexico is called BioScan, and they developed the device strictly for horses. And the one in Colorado is called Equilite. It's the horse division, and if you want to go on the internet and look up Anodyne Therapeutics, A-N-O-D-Y-N-E Therapeutics, that is their human division. And they have gotten FDA approval, which is really exciting for this device. Based on their research, Dr. Thomas Burke is their main engineer. And they have done extensive research. I have some of the papers that they sent me on the, and a lot of orthopedic offices are using this. They have found it tremendously beneficial for people that are headed for hip replacement surgery or knee replacement surgery. They have managed to prevent that kind of surgery using the red light. And a lot of the experiments, the Equilite division is the one that's used on horses. Now, let me check time. Time is going fast. Now, our version, the Treager version that Jerry had built for me, is just this little pad right here, which has, now Jerry added magnets. I know of no other device that has these magnets in them. There's 8 magnets that are about 12,000 Gauss apiece. So this has a pretty powerful field. Then we have the diodes. These are fairly broad spectrum red diodes. They're very powerful, super luminous. They range from about 600 to 1,000 nanometers. So I'm going to plug it in. And it's flexible, although we can't bend it in half, obviously. And he calls it Treager. Treager is Jerry's division of his own company that's making these devices. High-density magnetic monochromatic biofield stimulator. Now, we have said, of course, for animal use only, because that is essentially what he's selling it for. But, of course, you know, go in the back room, shut the door, and stick it on. A sore shoulder, a sore back. I've handed it to a lot of people with everything from sore backs to sprained ankles, and wonderful for wound healing. Speeds up severe wound healing, including venous ulcers and non-healing sores. I have a whole paper if anyone's interested. It's really gross and disgusting open wounds that actually heal very quickly, about 10 times faster. And I tried it again on one of my horses who another horse attacked him and split his head open, gashed his head, and I could only get close enough to put some hydrogen peroxide on it, and he wouldn't let me touch it anymore. He was panic-stricken. His eyes were white, and all I had at the time was a little red bicycle light, of all things, which has, 5 diodes in it. That certainly doesn't go into the near-infrared range. But as soon as this horse, he'd been treated with light for another problem the week before, and as soon as he saw this red light in my hand, he lowered his head, which is actually one of the first reactions. Once they're not scared of this thing sitting on their head, the first thing they will do is drop their head and start breathing deeply. And it looks like they've been drugged. So as soon as this horse saw the red light in my hand, he immediately lowered his head. And I mean, this was very deep, about that deep, and looked like it really needed stitches. But he let me put the light on it, and he stood there as long as I needed to, and then he was calm enough that I was able to put a dressing on and wrap a bandage around him. And I don't like to stitch horses because I've never seen a horse with stitches that doesn't get an infection. It doesn't matter how hard we try to keep the wounds clean. They're just in a dirty environment. So I left this open. I left the gauze over it to keep the flies off it, and checked it every other day. Used a little more light on it, and much to my surprise, within 10 days, within 3 days it had closed over. Within 10 days, not only had it closed over, there was no proud flesh, no infection, and the hair was growing back. And it grew back with absolutely no scar tissue whatsoever, no scarring. You cannot tell there was a severe wound in this horse's head. I've worked with horses for 25 years, and I've never seen a severe wound like that heal so well, so clean, with nothing. Usually you end up with lumps of flesh, all kinds of, you just accept that with these animals because of the environment they're in. And the red light was, after I cleaned it with the hydrogen peroxide and I put a little fly ointment on it, that was it, the red light. Let me just plug this in. Now, because of the light, it's not going to show up too much, but if we could turn the light off, you would see that this would pretty much go right through my hand, certainly through the thicker flesh. So it penetrates fairly well. And the recent studies, what has been discovered about these LEDs, it kind of started with the laser, but it has been discovered that you do not need a laser light, the coherent beam, to have the effect that this red light does, these diodes. What they have found is that when these diodes are placed directly on the treatment site, let's say I had a sore elbow or scar tissue or whatever, I'm going to place this pad here. Within 15 seconds to 2 minutes, you're going to get the full effect. It doesn't have to be a long treatment. And what it does, what they have discovered that this particular wavelength does, is release a gas in the bloodstream called nitric oxide. Now, what's interesting about nitric oxide, first of all, let me tell you a little bit about it. I don't have all of this memorized, I'm sorry. The Nobel Prize for Physiology or Medicine was awarded in 1998 to the researchers that actually discovered nitric oxide as a healing medium. It's a gas. It was once thought to be a completely useless pollutant. And then these researchers, here we go, discovered that this gas transmits signals through the organism. So it's a signaling signaling mechanism. And it penetrates through the membranes. It regulates the function of another cell. Now this is an entirely new system of principle for signaling in biological systems. Now these researchers, Robert F. Furchtgott, Louis J. Ignarro, and Farid Murad, were awarded the Nobel Prize in 1998. They actually discovered it, and their experiments continued to discover exactly what the nitric oxide did. Now, I don't want to go too long on this, but I don't know if we can can we lower the lights just a little over here, or is it going to mess things up? I just wanted to see how bright this actually is. And we don't have to. It's most effective if you use it in a darkened room, but I've used it in broad daylight on the horses and had the same results. I tested it on about 7 horses. See, it's quite bright. Okay. That's the third thing. I'll leave it on for a minute. Robert Furchtgott, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, might be Furchtgott, was a pharmacologist in New York. He studied the effects of drugs on blood vessels, but often achieved contradictory results. The same drug would sometimes cause a contraction and or contraction, and other times a dilation. We're basically talking the same system when you take nitrogen for heart conditions. The same drug would sometimes cause the contraction, sometimes the dilation, so there was the controversy. He wondered if the variation depended on whether the surface cells, which are the endothelium, inside the blood vessels were intact or damaged. And in 1980, he demonstrated that acetylcholine, which is a neurotransmitter, dilated blood vessels only if the endothelium was intact. And his conclusion was that blood vessels are dilated because the endothelial cells produce an unknown signal molecule that makes vascular smooth muscle cells relax. So his findings were what started the quest to find this factor. This other doctor, an MD, Farid Murad, a pharmacologist from Houston, analyzed how nitroglycerin and related vasodilating compounds act and discovered in 1977 that they release nitric oxide, in effect relaxing the smooth muscle cells. He was the first to find a gas previously thought to be nothing more than a waste product, could regulate important cellular functions, and speculated that other factors such as hormones might also act through nitric oxide. Now at this time there was no experimental evidence to support this idea. Remember, this is back in 1977. The other researcher, Louis J. Ignarro, another pharmacologist in Los Angeles, was working with Furchtgott in his quest for the endothelium-derived relaxing factor, in particular its chemical nature. Through a series of brilliant analysis, he concluded in 1986 that the EDRF, or this relaxing factor, was identical to nitric oxide. And the combined discovery of Furchtgott and Ignarro spawned this flurry of research activities in laboratories all over the world, and this is basically where we are today, this common air pollutant. It has been confirmed, and it's formed when nitrogen burns, and nobody could believe that it had such an important effect on the organism. So further study and research results quickly confirmed the importance of nitric oxide as a signal molecule of key activity for the cardiovascular system, as well as exerting a series of other functions. It was known to be produced in bacteria, but was not expected to be of any importance in higher animals, such as mammals. Such a simple molecule, and it's also very unstable. It converts to nitrate and nitrite within about 10 seconds. So the action of nitric oxide in the nervous system works as a weapon against infections. It regulates blood pressure. It's a gatekeeper of blood flow to different organs. It's made by many different types of cells. It's manufactured from arginine, which is a simple amino acid, and it can be released from hemoglobin using the specific frequencies of light. It's also inactivated by the presence of oxygen-free radicals. Now, nitric oxide is produced by the innermost cell layer of the arteries, the endothelium, rapidly spreads through the cell membranes to the underlying muscle cells. Now, their contraction is turned off by nitric oxide, resulting in a dilation of the arteries. So if someone is on nitroglycerin for heart medication, you have to be very careful using something like this. And then this particular pad with the magnets in it, again, you have to be very careful. It has a strong magnetic field. You can't use it on someone with a pacemaker. So that's how blood pressure and its distribution is controlled by the gas. When it's formed in nerve cells, nitric oxide spreads rapidly in all directions, activating all cells in the vicinity. So when we put this on the treatment site, the injury site, or in the case with the horses, I'll show you in just a second on the chart, I do a general treatment on the main acupressure points. And that's what I found to be most effective. So many functions are modulated with this gas spreading so rapidly, such as behavior and even gastrointestinal motility. When it's produced, when nitric oxide is produced in white blood cells, large quantities are achieved, so it becomes toxic to invading bacteria and parasites. So it has a number of uses, and of course the research is continuing quite extensively, in particular on the nitric oxide L-arginine pathway. So there's some really important things going on in the scientific field, and what's exciting, as I said, is that Equilite and Anodyne are FDA approved. Now the treatment, my horse in particular, about a year ago, 2 years ago now actually, he was an older horse anyway at the time. He was 19 years old, and I basically retired him to what we call the lesson string, which is where instead of me riding him all the time, he goes to students. So I've been a professional since about 1980 and trained a lot of horses. And this is a horse that basically I rescued him. He had quit jumping. He was imported from Belgium, very expensive at the time, and I've traced his history back through various owners, but he broke down eventually. He was jumped over big fences and I guess almost killed over a big solid fence in Florida about 10 years ago when he flipped over and split his neck open. So the entire underside of his neck was scar tissue to begin with, very lumpy and hard. I've really never seen anything like that. So he was basically this poor old broken down horse, and he didn't even want to jump anymore. So I basically rehabilitated him, not using light or anything at the time, just proper training techniques. And he was coming back, he was sound, he was going really well. He was a little bit wobbly to the right all the time. He always felt a little bit awkward, but I thought, well, he's old and that's the best we're going to get out of him. But about 2 years ago, while a child was riding him, he was just trotting, and all of a sudden he couldn't walk anymore. His right leg had collapsed. And it was all we could do to get him out of the arena. There was nothing, he didn't step on anything, he didn't twist anything, it was nothing. 1 second he was okay, the next second he could not stand on 4 legs anymore, he was on 3 legs. So we got him to hobble back to the barn, and I did a little bit of massage. I was taught about 20 years ago a very simple shiatsu technique, which worked on the acupressure points in the cervical area, the thoracic, and right where the thoracic and the lumbar vertebra joint up in the horse's back. And I've used the shiatsu technique on a number of horses, and that in itself has taken, I've had horses that were severely lame, and just with a few minutes a day, they've been okay with that technique. So I knew that those acupressure points were very, very sensitive and very affected by a simple massage technique. So that's what I used on this horse, and he came back, but I turned him out. He was still off. Obviously, he'd suffered some major trauma, and I didn't know what it was because there's no heat, no swelling, none of the other obvious signs of injury, a very obscure injury. I had no idea where the actual injury site was. And the veterinarians will admit to not knowing a whole lot about horses' backs and hindquarters. They don't x-ray them, they don't really ultrasound the areas. Most vets will, what they're doing now is they're injecting substances that support the joints, which are now, of course, have made their way into the human medical field, such as glucosamine and MSM and all of the joint supplements. And they have formulated some pretty strong medicines that will actually start to rebuild the cell matrix and replace lost joint fluid in the horses. So that's generally what they do, but they cannot find the exact site of an injury. Very obscure. So I gave this horse 6 months off, turned him out, didn't ride him, brought him back, started riding him. He seemed to be okay. So I took him to the stable that I work and live at just down the street from here. And within a month, he was starting to go lame again on the same leg. And again, no obvious site of injury. So I turned him out again and watched him, and after a while he had deteriorated to the point, he's now 24 years old. He was literally standing on two legs, and I thought I was going to have to put him down. He seemed to be suffering a lot, and of course the legs that are not injured start to take all of the stress from the legs that are injured. So he would stand out in the pasture with his right leg rolled over like this, right on the fetlock joint, and his left front leg held out like this, trying to support himself. And I felt really bad for him because there seemed to be nothing really that we could do. And then I read about equilite and anodyne and thought, well, I'm trained in light therapy, I should know a little bit more about this. And I had a lady with a bioscan unit which uses cluster head diodes like this, only some of them are more into the infrared range. The bioscan itself will scan, it's like a little tuning fork that scans the acupressure meridians through the horse's body, and it's tuned so that it will emit a squeal when it finds anomalies, electrical anomalies anywhere in the system. So then the operator marks the horse with a crayon wherever we've gotten the squeal from the biofind, is what they call that particular unit. And then each site is treated 2 minutes maximum with the cluster head diodes or something like this. And they do 3 treatments. It takes quite a while to scan the horse, but they do 3 treatments in the course of 1 week. So that is the plan that I followed with the horses. I do them for 20 minutes with the light. I treat the areas in red, and it basically treats the whole body. This particular horse, we found sore spots all over him. What I didn't think was bothering him was the old scar tissue under his neck. It was bothering him a lot. Now, no vet would ever point that out. They just go, oh, well, he's got scar tissue there. He was very sore up by his head. Now remember, it's the right hind leg that collapsed, which tells you a lot about the body systems. We don't know where those original injuries start from, and that may have taken that 10 years or 14 years to develop to its absolute worst. And once we start putting students on a horse, a professional will ride a horse very straight and very correct, whereas a student will start sitting because they just don't have the developed musculature to sit correctly on the horse, which is right here. We want to sit over the longer ribs, the horse's center of gravity, as close to that shoulder blade as possible, where the ribs are the longest. Now you can see on this chart it's just kind of roughed in, but back here, the horse's ribs are shorter, and they even get to where we call them false ribs. They're not solid bone, they're more cartilage. Now if a rider starts sitting on that part of the horse's back, you're going to start breaking down those muscles because the horse has a huge abdomen. So that spine, which isn't that big by comparison, has to hold up all the weight of the organs in the abdomen. So if you put a rider on top of that whose seat is not properly developed and they're putting all their weight in the wrong place, maybe a little too far back on the horse, then we're going to start to have problems all through the horse's body. And this is a part that is still very obscure to veterinary science. Now, if you start thinking about your own back, if you put your knuckles and press into your lower back and press real hard and hold it there for a long time, it's going to hurt. And if you have to run around and jump or work cattle or do something with all that pressure on your back, eventually you're going to start compensating in your musculoskeletal system, and then eventually you're going to start really breaking down somewhere. And that's what leads up to our hip surgeries and knee surgeries and back surgeries is, initial trauma. And then after compensating over a number of years, you're going to wear your cartilage or your bone, and that is going to be all kinds of problems. Or like in my case, where I have a genetically defective spine and a wedged thoracic vertebra, and that causes all kinds of problems because it presses on nerves in the wrong way. So any device, any non-invasive device such as this that will straighten things out is immensely valuable. If you can avoid surgery, not only the cost, but the follow-up, and of course it's always controversial. There's a 50-50 chance that you're going to be okay. And then there's the scar tissue. I mean, we could go on and on. You know about that kind of stuff. So this old horse of mine, after we found all the sore spots, and again, the right hind leg, strangely enough, I thought the stifle joint was bothering him right here. And I thought, because the stifle itself almost seemed like it had popped out of joint, the leg was just kind of hanging there by that stifle. But if you look at this, it's connected up through here. All right, so the very top of that joint, right where the sacral and lumbar vertebra meet, we call that the point of the croup. Now that is the top of that joint. And that the ligaments there that hold that whole hind end together will start to loosen in a horse that has been traumatized, injured, or incorrectly developed or ridden. And once that ligament starts to loosen, it can manifest itself as anything from kind of offness to severe and very obvious lameness, but it won't show the typical symptoms of lameness or injury. So that's kind of the equivalent to our human lower back, which, as we know, is the site of all kinds of problems. So my old horse was not sore in the stiffles or in the joints, or where I thought. He was sore all through the false rib area and both sides of the sacral vertebra at the back, and again, very sore up in the head, in that neck area. So after one treatment, he figured it out. This was a real good thing. I was watching him very closely as the lights were placed on his body. The first thing I noticed was that his entire neck area from that shoulder blade forward seemed to raise about an inch. I could see it happen right in front of my eyes as the lights were placed on him, the neck raised. And then his whole head and neck lowered. The bioscan unit actually places a cap, a light cap on the horse's head. So the whole time he's being treated with the cluster head diodes, with the infrared light, he's got something like this on his head. Now that cervical area is the first area that I treat. And the horses, of course, they tend to be a little skeptical and nervous of strange things anyway, but I'll usually let them smell this and they'll very quickly let me place it on their head. And they get a lot of tension up here in the head, as humans do too. If you experience headaches or neck tension, you'll know what I'm talking about. Within seconds, every horse, I've tested it on, I think I've done 9 cases out there now. And it seems that the older and more chronically lame these horses are, the quicker they'll respond. First thing they do is that head and neck lowers, their eyes start to close, they try to stay awake, they start to go like this, they're nodding off, and then they'll suddenly snap themselves awake like they're trying to fight it, but they can't keep their eyes open after a while. And I'll find that the joints behind the head will loosen. I can then put my fingers and kind of shake the head back and forth and loosen the muscles. And then I'll work my way back to that thoracic area and the thoracic lumbar area. So on my horse, I saw the neck raise and his head lowered, and then they start breathing. You see them start to take deep breaths. It's almost like teaching them yoga, only we're doing it very quickly with this. They don't, well, some of them understand English, but if I said sit there and relax and breathe, it probably wouldn't work as well as just putting this on their head. And it has the same effect on people. It's almost, you can feel things moving under your skin. And again, as the lady that was treating my horse started to move the cluster diodes, I saw his tail started to raise. Now this particular breed of horse, this is called a Hanoverian horse. Typically, especially in the older ones such as him, they were bred in Germany as cart horses, and they had a tail carriage almost like an Arabian horse. And they've kind of bred it out of them now. The modern Hanoverian doesn't have that high tail carriage, but my horse is one of the older ones, and I'd always wondered why his tail sat flat into his hind quarter. He never carried it with the big arch that was typical of this particular breed. And after we finished treating him, I noticed he was lifting his tail. I thought, well, that's interesting. I turned him out in the pasture. Now remember, he'd been standing on 2 legs for months, and he was in a lot of pain. Put him back outside. First thing I saw, he lifted his head, and his ears pricked, and his tail went up in the air in a big arch, and he marched off down the pasture in a walk rhythm that I had not seen in this horse ever since I had had him as an 18-year-old. He's now 24 years old, basically crippled, walking down the pasture back to his pasture mates as if to show them how good he felt with his tail up in the air. I could not believe it. And I'm thinking, you know, I've been involved with light therapy since 1992. I should believe what I'm seeing, but I don't believe what I'm seeing. This is not normal. And I thought, well, we'll see if it holds. He'll probably be lame again the next day. Well, he wasn't. Brought him back in. He had his second treatment the day after that. We treat every second day for a week. So we brought him in. This time, he immediately lowered his head and turned his neck sideways into the light, trying to tell the lady where to put it. He wanted it on that sore muscle on the side. And so she treated him again, and when she bioscanned him again, she did the biofind, all the sore spots had changed. Most of them had gone. And interestingly enough, he was not sore in his lower legs at all. We have a lot of lamenesses and soreness with horses in the lower legs. And those are usually pretty obvious. There's heat and swelling and some kind of trauma that's occurred. But with these more obscure injuries, we just don't know what's going on, and the vets don't know. So all the sore spots had changed. There were fewer. Obviously, he was feeling better, and I thought, I'm going to try a little test here. This horse hasn't rolled in over a year. Horses love to roll. They think they're cleaning themselves. If you give them a bath and you brush them off, the first thing they're going to do is go out and roll in the dirt. And this horse loved to roll. I mean, I would just lead him around, and I knew he wanted to roll. When he wanted to roll, he would stand there and he'd stick his hoof in the dirt and throw a big pile of dirt up, and I knew he wanted to have a roll. And he loved to roll, and he loved to lay down. He hadn't done that in over a year. And I knew he was suffering. He was probably really tired. I thought, well, he sure looks different. His whole musculoskeletal system, something looked different. All the muscles that were real tense and holding him into this awkward position were all relaxed. And I thought, if this horse rolls, I put him out in that paddock, I know something's changing here. He's feeling better. I put him out in the pen, and I stood there and watched him for a minute. And he kind of walked around and sniffed, and I thought, well, what's he going to do? All of a sudden, there he went. There was the hoof in the dirt, and he threw that pile of dirt up. Oh, my goodness, he's going to roll. And sure enough, first time in over a year, he goes down. He had himself the best roll he's ever had in his life. He rolled over, and he flipped right over. Now, a lot of horses, younger horses and sound horses, can't even flip right over. So he laid down, he rolled, he got up, and he went down, he rolled again. And by the third treatment, after the third treatment, I got on this horse and rode him. And of course, I'm still skeptical at this point, because this defies logic. This shouldn't happen. You don't take a horse that's dead lame on no medication, put something like this on him a couple of times, and all of a sudden he's lame. I mean, sound. Was lame. Is sound. So after the third day, I thought, well, I'm going to get on him, see what he feels like. That horse felt younger and sounder than when I got him at 18 years old. He was so good. That awkwardness to the right that he'd always had was gone. So I started putting students back on him, and every now and then I'll touch him up, because he loves the lights. He's a light expert now. I can take the light pad in his stall, and he'll turn around and point his head at his back or tell me where he wants it. He's good at this. And he's still sound. He is still working. He's jumping. He's taking kids around in the show ring. At 24 years old, which is very advanced age-wise for a horse. That's an old horse, especially an old horse with a lot of injuries. What I've noticed, I'm right on the hour, but I'm almost ready. I want to conclude with what I have noticed. With this release of nitric oxide, this gas somehow continues to work long after the last treatment with this light pad. Not only does the horse's entire musculoskeletal system seem to change shape. I've taken horses with that sacroiliac joint that were so bad. One horse, 28 years old, had been lame for 2 months. His one hind leg was swollen this big because he twisted his pelvis. If you looked at the horse square on from behind, he was on a tilt about like that. Completely unusable. After the third treatment with this, actually after the first treatment, the second treatment, he dragged me into the barn. This horse could not walk for 2 months. He was confined to a pen. He hauled me into the barn. By the third treatment, the leg had gone back to normal, the swelling was gone, and the pelvis was level. The horse and all these horses continued to improve, continued to change shape. I've taken horses in their advanced 20s that now look like they're much younger, knocked about 10 years off them. They continue to change shape for months. The scar tissue in my horse's neck is almost gone. And it continued months. The development continued long after I quit using the light on him. To me, this is amazing. All of those horses went back to work. They are still working. They're still sound. And their whole body looks completely different. Now, that to me is so amazing. Absolutely amazing. Just with this. nothing else, and just treating. I treated all the horses on those very simple, very basic acupressure points. And they've changed. And the other horses around them, this is interesting, this is what they've discovered with people, is that when you start treating someone with light, not only does that person change, but the other people around them change. It works somehow on the energy field. Now, Dr. Popp in Germany, this new biological system has discovered that DNA produces light. And structures in the cell walls amplify that light. And they are now treating Nishant Matthews. Again, if you want an appointment with Nishant, I do have his phone number. He's up in Sedona, but also comes to Phoenix once a week. He uses this Moray device, which he will put homeopathic medicines in. It transfers the energy of the homeopathic medicine through the energy field of the body. He uses lights like this, only there's more of them. And he treats, again, the energy field, the auric field. And I did have that treatment myself about a month ago, and it is spectacular. I could feel everything in my back moving and rearranging itself. And so I'm going to conclude with the fact that, yes, there is major research happening through very important universities with the red light. Continued discoveries. It is absolutely confirmed since the Nobel Prize was awarded for the discovery of nitric oxide that this is all going ahead. There is no turning back at this point, which to me is so exciting. So yay, I'm concluding with that. Thank you.